If you're passionate about transforming retail operations and improving performance, plus you're accountable for key change projects and programs in your company, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Retail Transformation Show with me, Oliver Banks. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Retail Transformation Show. I am Oliver Banks, your host, and as always, it's a real honour and a delight to be sitting down with you and spending some quality time diving into retail transformation. Now, you know this just as well as I do, but in the challenging world of retail, it can be tough to survive, obviously as a company, but as an individual as well. The whole industry is going through a shift, and many retailers are finding it tough in the marketplace. That pressure leads down and bleeds down into the individuals that work for that retailer. It makes life busy, challenging, high pressure, high stakes, stressful, right? But what's interesting about stress is that it is all in your mind, in your head. It's within the realms of your control. But to do that, you must build up your resilience, your mental resilience, your emotional resilience. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be introducing you to my special guest today. It's someone I've known for a number of years. She works with busy executives to help them overcome the stresses and strains by being themselves and giving them tools and skills that can help move them from struggling and surviving through to smashing it and thriving. So today I am delighted to welcome Steph Tranter to the Retail Transformation Show. As I was saying, I've known her for a number of years. She's brilliant. She's fantastic. She has helped me. And between you and I, if it wasn't for her, if it wasn't for the confidence that she built in me, I probably wouldn't be hosting this show. So I do have a lot to thank her for. I'm really excited about jumping into this one. It's a great conversation. It's part 1 today, and there's going to be part 2 next week. So remember to hit subscribe and come back and listen to part 2. So without further ado, let's jump straight on in. Here we go. Welcome to the Retail Transformation Show, Steph. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Ollie. Thanks for having me here. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you very much, and it's a total pleasure. We did work together, as I'm sure we'll dive into in the conversation. We did work together a few years ago, so it's been a pleasure staying in contact with you. And just to help set the scene, you do help executives and senior business people to build up their resilience, to build up their self-confidence so that they can be the best self that they are, right? Tell me a bit more.
That's right. And it's probably about 8.5 years since we worked together, maybe even a bit longer. So it's quite crazy, really.
Wow. It's quite a while, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, you're right. I'm an executive coach. I work for myself. And as I said, I've been doing that for the last 8.5 years. Prior to that, which is where you and I met each other, I worked for Tesco, and I was there for a good proportion of time, for about 11 years. Now I work with senior directors, this kind of C-suite population of people in corporate businesses. I also take on a handful of kind of personal clients too. They tend to be your MDs of smaller companies. Companies I work for in the corporate world tend to be a mix of household names like Harrods or UK Sport or Camelot or WeWork, so a range of industries too, but equally some smaller businesses and maybe not so much household names. So that's the kind of people I work with. And my background at Tesco was, actually started on the checkouts really whilst I was at uni, and then worked my way up into training and HR because I got really interested in people and developing myself, and then ended in the Group Leadership Academy, which is probably where you and I met when I was running some of the leadership training for the leaders in the business across all of the countries that Tesco was in and all the different industries they were in. So it was like 13, 14 countries, I think, at the time when you and I were both there. So I guess that's the sort of background. Should tell you a bit more about the coaching I do and why people come to have coaching with me. Would that be useful?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure some of it will come out in our conversation, but Give me the high level for starters.
It might help position some of the things that we're going to talk about, because each coach probably focuses on different types of things. So whilst, I'm on the sort of senior director population, people probably come to me for one of three reasons. The magic number is going to be 3, by the way. I was looking through my notes and there's always 3 of everything. Apart from when we get to my 5 steps, then there's 5. But we'll stick with 3 at the moment.
You have to simmer them down.
Yeah, definitely. I need magic 3 on those. So there's 3 reasons why people often come to me. Quite often they're at a crossroads in their career. So they might have fallen into their jobs, or it's been a really obvious pathway for them, but then they've woken up one day and gone, oh my God, I don't know where to go. I'm stuck. I don't even know who I am now. Actually, what do I want from life? So there's a bit of a crossroads in their career. Sometimes HR directors recommend me to people who have got high potential, but something's holding them back. So they absolutely could go further in their careers, but something's holding them back. But then equally, it's often people who have just transitioned into a new role or been promoted, and they're suffering a lot of, I think this is a bit of a phrase at the moment, imposter syndrome. So they feel like they're winging it. They feel like they're going to get found out any minute. And so it's a little bit about helping people in those 3 scenarios. But interestingly, here's my other set of 3. Actually, where people start with needing help isn't always where we end up. So the conversations are never just about someone's career. And actually there's 3 core areas. And I think this is where we're getting into in terms of where you wanted us to talk about, really. So the 3 areas that come up for me is quite often about identity. So who am I? What is the unique value I have to offer? And that can go across all of those areas in terms of being at a crossroads or being promoted. Who am I? Actually, what sort of leader do I want to be? Because I've got this idea that there's this one type of leader that everybody has to be, and I'm just not that. And so I don't know quite what that looks like for me.
That's a big question now. What kind of leader do I want to be? I love it.
Well, and also because we don't often ask that, do we? We don't often ask what kind of leader do I want to be. We always look at, well, that's what a leader should be. That's what a rounded director should be. We need to aim for rounded, which I think is rubbish, to be honest.
The normal mold, the normal fit in, my business, my organization is X. So therefore I must comply, right?
Absolutely.
But actually, let's take a different perspective. Actually, who am I?
Yeah.
And who should I be? And how can I be the best self? Okay. So identity, really big part.
Absolutely. And I do a lot of work around strengths. And I think that's something that we'll probably talk about shortly as well, because we often forget what our natural strengths are. We often forget what comes easily to us because it comes so easily. We don't think it's valuable. And yet then we miss opportunities to use it, or we just miss that we've got those things because we're so focused on all the things we haven't got. And that's massively linked to resilience and stress management as well. But I think that's all of these areas are quite fundamentally linked. But I do think there's a little bit about, okay, so what are my strengths that I can use that make me the leader I want to be? So I'm authentic and I'm not being drained of energy, because this is stuff that comes natural to me. So yeah, so there's quite a lot about strengths and energy. One of the other areas I hear so often is, I want to go and get that job over there, or I'm in my dream job and I'm loving what I'm doing, but I just don't know if I'm credible enough, experienced enough, qualified enough. I don't know if I'm good enough. And I hear that so many times. So a lot of things I work on, which is linked to the self-identity, but I would label it as self-belief or self-esteem. And I think it does go back to that belief in what's unique about you, how you add value by being just you. We're taught throughout our lives, even you go back to school, when you get your grades, you get your A's and your B's if you're lucky enough, or, in that kind of mindset of being able to perform academically. But the attention goes to your C's, D's, or your fails. So you're taught constantly to focus on all the stuff you're not very good at to make them better. And that goes throughout your whole entire life. And no one gets you to go, actually, this is where your A's are. How do we make you even greater at that? How do we emphasize that even more? And I think that's why a lot of us don't have high self-belief or high self-esteem, because we're always focused on what we don't have. And then the third area, which I think possibly separates me from some of the other coaches out there, because a lot of executive coaching, it is business orientated. It is about achieving business goals. I fundamentally believe that you can't change or achieve anything from a business perspective if you don't look at the whole person and you don't look at that. So some coaches like look at personality questionnaires and all of those types of things. I go a little bit deeper, and this probably links to a lot of the work I do around stress management and resilience, because I focus very much on self-awareness of your emotions. So we're all human beings. We all have emotions. They all serve an evolutionary purpose. From cavemen and women days, we've had emotions that are basically there to help us survive. And yet we've become into a culture, and again, I think it starts from school, because no one teaches you about your emotions and how to deal with them. And actually, I go very much deeply into, so what emotions do you feel, when do you feel them, and how do you manage them? And I think that for me is the core of dealing with stress and being resilient. But we suppress emotions, we don't face into them, because we don't feel like we can, or we don't like it. So I guess I kind of focus in on that area as well. So they're all quite linked. They're all very much about personal self-awareness. I'm not a big believer in sheep dip workshops where I've got a set of things where I'm going to teach you them and therefore you'll all be fine again. We know about sleeping, eating right, all of those kind of things, exercising. For me, it's about knowing yourself and knowing what are your triggers and knowing what's unique about you and really understanding you as a person. Doesn't matter what works for somebody else or what's right for somebody else, it's what's right for you. And whilst I might have, we're going to talk about this in a bit, 5 steps that help people, they're the 5 biggest activities that help people manage their emotions better and manage stress and be more resilient. My underlying message under all of that is, yes, these are the 5 steps and the guiding principles, but what does it mean to you? What works for you? So I guess, yeah, and those are all very science-based as well. It's not just kind of plucking 5 things out of the air. Those are based in science.
That's certainly one of the things, Steph, I really loved about working with you and, understanding your different perspectives is they are science-based. So if you're a bit of a geek like I am, then understanding what's going on in your brain and with all of the chemicals in your body just helps to almost normalize it a bit. It says, this is okay. And certainly I've found that hugely useful in the past.
Yeah, I think it's very much about just, I'm similar. I'd probably label myself as similarly geeky.
It's a term of endearment. I used to have a coach that said, being a geek is a term of endearment.
I think there's all a little bit of geek in all of us, to be honest. To your point, I think it's about understanding. If you understand why something is the way it is. So people talk about, oh, you've got to do mindfulness, or you've got to do this, or you've got to get good sleep, or you've got to, I don't know, all these different things. But no one then stops and says, this is why. This is why it helps, and fundamentally why it helps you as a human being. And there's so much science out there around how the brain works, and some really simple science actually around why it's really important to manage emotions. It's not just about some fluffy, airy fairy, we've all got to get in touch with our emotions. It's very much around actually the science shows if we're not looking, dealing with our emotions, then we can't think straight and solve our problems. And I can go into a bit more detail around that if you like, but for me, fundamentally, that's the message is actually our emotions are there stopping us think straight. It's not just because you're rubbish at what you're doing or you can't do it. It's our emotions fundamentally stopping us think straight.
That's really interesting, because if we're thinking about the world of retail transformation, then actually, there's a huge amount going on and there's a huge amount to do. And maybe you're listening to this and maybe you're in a place where the world is not perfect. You're under a lot of stresses and strains and you're feeling the pressure of your overall organization's performance. And maybe you're feeling, a real sense of ownership, of responsibility, or even accountability to turn things around, to transform things. And that can be a difficult place. So if that's you, we've got some really excellent guidance coming up here. So, Steph, I know we've got a bit of a buzzword here for you. Stress. That's not the right term. Tell me more.
Thanks for that, Ollie. Yes. Stress really bugs me. That word stress, it really, I say bugs me, makes me really angry. Let's name an emotion here. It makes me angry because I think it's a word we use as a catch-all for our emotions. So all I was banging on about earlier around emotions, one of the reasons why we don't talk about them is we don't even name them. Stress is an acceptable word, like the word overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, by the way, is not an emotion. it's a state like stress, and it's an acceptable word to say. It's like, I'm busy. You busy? Or, oh, I'm just so stressed. It's a word we use to cover up. Well, not to cover up, just to label the emotions we feel. A lot of my work around resilience, my argument is actually stress is just the result of mismanaged emotions, because the more we're not naming and labeling and accepting and dealing with emotions, the worse they get. The more, because most of the time I haven't got time to feel like that right now. I haven't got time to do this. I've got to just crack on. I've just got to get through this. I mean, how many times, I've just got to get through this as a strategy. And that works sometimes for short periods, but it's not a long-term strategy, and it's not a sustainable, healthy strategy. So for me, stress is a word we use because it's acceptable, but it's the result of mismanaged emotions. And when you talk about the sort of environments your listeners are in, where things are constantly changing, the times are really tough, you've got to innovate, you've got to create, you've got to influence people who are different types of characters, so you've got to quite flex your style and build really good relationships. You've got to answer for things when maybe they don't go right. You've got to be willing to make mistakes because we're in new territories. You've got to be dynamic. I mean, all this pressure on you. You talk about pressure, and we'll go, I'm stressed. But actually, in amongst all of that, you could be a bit afraid, but to say I'm afraid, goodness, that sounds massive, doesn't it? Even I'm a bit worried quite a lot of time. Oh, it's a bit concerning, or, that's a bit troubling. We use lighter words, which can help sometimes, but actually it dampens down the fact that you actually, when you look at the spectrum of the emotion fear, concern, anxiety, worry, they're on that spectrum. They're just lesser words. And actually, so fear might be something you're feeling. Frustration, we're quite happy to use the word frustration, but that's on the spectrum of the emotion anger. Actually, you're probably really blooming angry. This person's being an idiot and not listening to you, or something's gone wrong and you're angry with yourself. Maybe you're feeling a bit guilty and ashamed because, quite often when we're in these kinds of industries, you're very loyal to the people that are there and you care. The reason why you get so strong emotions about things is because you care. You want to make it right. You don't want to let anybody down. So if you think about on any day, you're probably going from fear to anger to guilt to shame, maybe sadness, disappointment. And yet we might not even know we're experiencing all those emotions because we don't name them. We don't pay attention to them because we're just trying to get through this, So
we have a tendency to bucket it all in together and say, I'm feeling stressed, right? But what's the danger? So if we're not labeling the emotions properly and we're just lumping them all into that stress bucket, why is that bad?
Yeah, so the danger, it comes back to what I was saying about the science. So if I just briefly talk about this, the practical danger of it all is that if you look at our brain, this is a really simple version of the situation that goes on. But basically, if you look at our brain...
We like simple.
Yeah, I like simple too. There's two core areas in our brain that's related to stress, for instance. So you've got the limbic part of the brain. This is, from an evolution perspective, our oldest part of our brain. It's been with us since the beginning of time as human beings. This part of the brain deals with all of our emotions. It's something that reacts very automatically to stimuli in the outside world that is to us threatening. And it will react automatically. It's almost like quite hypersensitive. It's a bit of a drama queen, it's really kind of sensitive to things that are going to trigger us. You've got the limbic system then that deals with all our emotions.
So that's the sort of the caveman, the cavewoman, fight or flight.
Yes.
Keep me alive, and that's it.
Yeah, that function is all about your brain's purpose is to help you survive. That's fundamentally what it's all about. And that part of your brain is the bit that lies below our conscious. Sorry, it lies below our consciousness, and reacts to things to help keep you alive. So yes, in our cavemen and women days, it would be alerted to danger. There's a saber-toothed tiger. You're not consciously thinking this. You're noting there's a saber-toothed tiger. Clicks in. It sends a whole load of hormones through your body to ready yourself to prepare for this. You mentioned the fight or flight. We often call that the stress response. It's actually the fear response. So you are feeling the emotion of fear in that moment, releasing cortisol, adrenaline all through your body to enable you to either fight that saber-toothed tiger or run away from it. Or there's a third option, which is freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. So all of these things are happening. It's reducing all the energy that would normally go to your immune system and your digestive system. It's shutting all of that down. Do you ever have those times where you're really nervous before an interview? And I can't believe I'm about to say this, and I apologize in advance, but you're on the toilet a lot. That's your digestive system getting everything out of your system because you're in a fight or flight. You don't need to be able to digest things when you're in a fear situation and when your life is at stake. And the thing is, then all the energy goes to your muscles.
So there we go. Important things explained here on the Retail Transformation Show.
Yeah. You're always on the toilet before an interview. Maybe that's just me, but that's a scientific explanation.
Got it.
And so the energy goes to your muscles. And I guess what I was going to say is that is it any wonder that the people you often see are the most stressed and maybe then leading to burnout get the most colds? And, there's this often linked to IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, everything to do with your digestive system. And they often say that's a bit psychological. And I wonder if it's just because, emotions are meant to be short-lived and the fear response is meant to be short-lived, because we're not managing this and we're not, expressing that kind of fight or flight, we're suppressing it. Actually, it's suppressing all of those other reactions. So even if you're pushing a feeling away, all of those physical things are still happening within your body.
Wow.
So it's still happening even if you're pretending and suppressing an emotion, which is the scary thing. So I guess one of the reasons why it's really important to name and label and understand and be aware of your emotions is a health reason, actually, in terms of your long-term health, physical health, not least your mental health. So that's all going on. And by the way, it's not just the fear response that's dealt with in the limbic system. It's also, other emotions like sadness and guilt and anger. So, and arguably anger is also part of that fear response, because that's the bit about when you feel angry, the evolutionary reason around that, the reason why we get angry is about protecting something. So actually it's really interesting when you do get angry, if you understand your emotions and you understand, oh, this is me feeling angry and I know what that feels like, then actually what's that saying? What am I trying to protect here? And that can help you really understand, why you're getting angry, and then give you the reasons or give you the places you need to go to solve that. But I'm sort of digressing slightly. So the limbic system deals with all our emotions. And by the way, on the stress response or fear response, fight or flight thing, yes, we don't face saber-toothed tigers now. Absolutely. Arguably there might be some in our offices and places that we work, but generally we don't face saber-toothed tigers. But the key is, and this is why I was saying self-awareness, and not just awareness of your weaknesses, which is often what people equate with self-awareness. Self-awareness is actually really understanding yourself and understanding what's going on in you and what are your triggers. While we haven't got any saber-toothed tigers, what happens is that we feel emotions in response to what we perceive as to being dangerous. So it doesn't matter if it's real or perceived. If we're seeing something as a threat to us, and we may not initially and consciously see it as a threat to survival, but we will see it as a threat to us, we will get an emotional response. So a massive to-do list we'll see as a threat, and then we'll have the same sort of fear response. A really annoying, micromanaging boss, we'll see as a threat. Interestingly, again, the science shows that any threat to our financial security is registered in the same part of the brain as mortal danger. Fascinating.
Wow. Okay.
I know. That tells us that anything to do with our jobs, and most of the time it's linked to the jobs, because if things go wrong, our immediate thing is, oh my God, I'm going to get sacked, or people are going to think I'm rubbish at this, or I'm going to think I'm really rubbish at what I'm doing. And so actually then that, then you catastrophize potentially if you're kind of that way focused. Into, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. And then I've got, people won't take risks and set up their own businesses or do other risks because they're so afraid of failure and so afraid of not being able to pay the mortgage, and that is a risk to our financial security. So, and it's registered. So if you have any of those, it's very likely you're having some form of fear response. So those are just some really interesting points around that. And that's why I think self-awareness is so crucial.
That's huge, isn't it?
Massive.
So we don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore, but we still have bosses. We still have people that can affect our financial security.
Yeah.
So we still get the same emotional response from our limbic system part of the brain.
Yes.
Incredible. Thank you, Steph.
Well, no, you're welcome. And I didn't make it up. I'll take the credit for that.
Oh, you didn't make it up. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, lovely. But the key point that I'm actually working towards here is there's another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which sits sort of just, I'm pointing to my forehead now. I know, you can all see that. In front of your head and your forehead. This is a part of the brain that is the newer part of our brain. And it is where we do all our rational thinking. It's where we do our logical thinking. It's where we're able to put things in perspective. It's where we do good of our decision making, our creativity. Yeah, it's all of that kind of thinking kind of things. The key in all of this, and probably, I mean, if all of those messages, what I was just saying just then, weren't enough to go help you think, oh goodness, I best look into my emotions and what's going on for me, is that actually when your limbic system is really active, i.e., you're having an emotional response, the ability of your prefrontal cortex to function actually diminishes. Physically is unable to function. And the best way to illustrate this is, those times when you might be sat with a friend or a mate or a colleague, and they're really upset, they're crying their eyes out, or they're really, really angry. And in the crying scenario, they just can't see the solution to the problem. And you're going, for me, it's really obvious, just do this, this, and this. Surely that will solve it. But they don't see it. But then a few days later, they'll come back to you and go, you were right. I just got to do this, this, and this. And you're like, yeah, that's what I was saying. But they literally just couldn't see it because the limbic system was stopping their prefrontal cortex from working effectively. And equally with the anger stuff, you always hear when people get angry and they're arguments. I mean, the physical response when you get angry, every emotion has a response in the body. It shows up in the body in some way. And when you get angry, actually, the physical response is you want to punch someone. You absolutely want to have a fight. And when you get angry, you also say a lot of things that are very kind of fighting talk, and you say some extremes, and it's where we swear our most, And the thing is again, at that point, you can't see logic or rationality. And quite often after you've come out of the anger and the frustration, and a few days later, you'll be going, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Oh my God, I can't even believe I thought that about someone, or it's quite a powerful emotion as well. So actually it's a bit of one of those emotions that we like and don't like because we feel powerful when we feel angry. But equally, that anger, you talk about the mist coming over, it basically stops your prefrontal cortex from working. And so why this is really important.
Wow.
I know. I mean, it's really important because the first thing is you need to be aware that you're feeling these emotions. And then you need to be aware around, okay, well, how do I deal with this? Because I fundamentally believe every single person can solve any problem that they've got. They've got the brain capacity to do it. It's just when we feel an emotion, it stops our brains functioning as we know we can. And for me, that is the biggest selling point as to why we need to get better educated about emotions as a whole, but equally why we need to get better educated about our own emotional reactions. And I guess just a point on this, so some of your listeners might be going, that doesn't sound like me. I don't feel emotions. I'm quite calm. Everyone sort of says I'm really calm. And absolutely, there's probably a spectrum of people where you've got some, and I'm probably right at the far end of hugely emotional, hugely sensitive, can't control. If I'm upset, I'll cry. You say anything on this, Ollie, and it makes me sad or even makes me happy, I'll cry. I'm at that spectrum. I feel them, I express them. You've got the other side of the end of the spectrum where some people don't feel them as strongly, don't express them as strongly, and all the different people in the middle. But absolutely 100%, we are all human beings and we will all feel emotions to some degree, and they will be affecting how we think.
But so that, if you come out of a meeting and you think, oh, why did I say that? Why didn't I say that?
Yeah.
You're thinking about things afterwards. That's where your prefrontal cortex has basically been shut down during that stressful situation. I know that's the wrong word, but let's go with it. That's what's happening, right?
Yeah. Well, you've probably got two things going on there. Probably something in the meeting triggered you to feel an emotion, either frustration or worry or something, which then clouded your ability to say something that you would have normally said. You know how we get worried and you might trip over your words, or because we're quite nervous, so something might have happened then. And then as you're walking out the meeting, you might then start feeling angry because you didn't say what you could have said, or disappointed because so it's not like emotions just happen here and there and to big events. I think it's a constant thing going on every day. And like I said, emotions are meant to be short-lived, expressed, dealt with, and then moved on, and your prefrontal cortex can click back in. And this is the key here. We often think it's not within our control. Oh, that's just the way I am. I'll never change. I've always been an emotional person. But it's rubbish. You can change, and you are more in control of things than you think you are, and you're much more in control of your emotions than you think you are, and particularly your reactions to your emotions. And for me, it's about just being aware at first, and then also believing you are in control and there are things you can do to manage them. Because the most resilient people, and the science all shows this as well, there's a lot of research into this, and I would sort of back this up, that the most resilient people are the people who are able to click their rational brain back into action, that prefrontal cortex, quicker. And that comes with self-awareness and some techniques that help you to do that.
Well, that is huge. So let's get actionable here, Steph. You mentioned you've got 5 steps to help someone overcome stress as a broad bucket term.
Yep.
Go me through them very quickly, and then let's jump into some of them.
Yeah, lovely. It's like we planned this, Ollie. That was like such a lovely link, wasn't it, to like the actions? Yeah, so the 5 steps. So I've probably talked around them as we've been going. So step 1 is be aware of your thoughts and your feelings. Step 2 is diffuse, don't deny uncomfortable emotions. Step 3 is challenge and change what you focus on. Step 4 is manage your energy, not just your time. And step 5 is build and develop a support network, and particularly a support network aimed around resilience and managing stress and your emotions. So those are the 5.
Right, we're going to stop this one here. But wasn't that good? And it's going to get a whole lot better. There's part 2 still to come. So remember to subscribe and tune back in to the next episode. That's going to be episode 58. Steph Tranter was totally rocking the mic. And do you remember those 5 steps that we touched on right at the end? We're going to be diving into all of those in a whole lot more detail. So you're going to have actionable tips and tactics that you can take away and put into practice. Take action. This will help you be more emotionally resilient. It will help you to overcome that word stress. Oh, sorry, I probably shouldn't use that word, right? In the meantime, you can find out more about Steph Tranter on her website, thepositiveelement.com, thepositiveelement.com. I'm also going to put links to Steph's website and LinkedIn on the show notes page over at ob&co.uk/57. Do remember to hit subscribe and tune in every single week for your weekly dose of retail transformation. And if you're a regular listener, then I would so appreciate a rating and a review from you, particularly if you're an Apple user on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. If you could log a rating and a few nice words, then that would be so appreciated. And it helps other people to discover about great shows and the great guests that I'm lucky enough to have here on the Retail Transformation Show. I'm looking forward to joining you next time. Have a great week. Bye.